My name is Alina Merritt. I'm 32 years old. We're standing under the canopy of white linen tents, the scent of rosemary chicken and sugared peaches clinging to the breeze. My cousin's wedding, Stonebridge Estate, New Hampshire. Golden light, too perfect to be real. Heard you spent 8 years on some thesis nobody read. My brother says loud enough for the table to fall silent. Should have just gotten married like everyone else. I don't say a word. I don't even blink. He's holding a whiskey tumbler and grinning like he won something. My mother giggles behind her hand. Aunt Cora mutters something about wasting time. Silverware clinks awkwardly. No one meets my eyes. Across the courtyard, just beyond the trellis, a woman in dress blues pauses mid-step. There's a sharpness in her gaze. Then her head tilts, almost like recognition. The string quartet stutters just half a beat off tempo, and then the groom's commanding officer appears. My hands are folded in my lap. The edge of my linen napkin is tucked neatly between my fingers. I'm wearing a navy blue dress, knee-length modest. Hair pinned back, neutral lipstick, nothing to draw attention. But somehow, I always do. The table shifts. Someone coughs. My sister-in-law fidgets with her bracelet. No one knows where to look after what Nathan just said. Except me, I'm looking at the roses in the centerpiece. Burgundy and cream, a perfect spiral of silence. I mean, Nathan adds trying to soften the blow with a laugh. All that schooling, all that Harvard debt, and for what a binder on political theories. He grins at the others, waiting for someone to back him up. No one does. But no one stops him either. I glance up slowly. My brother's wearing a tailored gray suit, the same smug expression he wore at 20 when he stole my college fund to start his own business. A chain of vape shops. All failed. Yet here he is, the golden son, still welcomed, still praised. The wine in my glass is untouched. I take a sip. It tastes sharp. I wouldn't expect you to understand, I say quietly. And I'm not asking you to. It's the only sentence I'll speak all night. Nathan lets out another laugh, forced this time, and turns away. My mother nudges him gently, whispering something I don't catch. Across the garden, the officer is still watching. She's in formal service uniform insignia, sharp and gleaming on her collar. The woman beside her, tall in dark civilian attire, murmurs something close to her ear. They're not part of the wedding party, not part of this world, but their presence feels deliberate. The music resumes. Someone announces that cake will be served soon. A few people stand. Chairs scrape against flagstone. I excuse myself and walk slowly toward the edges of the tent, toward the garden path. The air is cooler here, and quieter. I pass by a lattice of ivy and settle on a bench tucked behind a row of boxwoods. My heels sink slightly into the gravel. My breath comes slow, controlled. A cardinal lands nearby, pecking the ground. The red of its feathers catches the late sun. I think about what Nathan said, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. It was a wound, reopened, not inflicted. I think about the years I spent in silence, in rooms full of men who doubted me, in lectures where I wasn't justified in asking questions, in labs where I pretended not to notice being dismissed. Harvard was never the problem. Being me was. I lean back and close my eyes. There are moments you know will stay with you not because they break you, but because they confirm something you've always known. Nathan didn't just insult my work. He diminished who I am, and that's what cut deepest. Footsteps crunch the gravel behind me. I stay still. A voice measured but low speaks over my shoulder. "Ma'am," she says. I didn't mean to interrupt. I turn slowly. It's the officer. Late 30s, maybe 40. Lieutenant Colonel, judging by the silver oak leaves on her epaulette. Her posture is upright but not rigid. Her eyes dark and searching hold something I don't recognize yet. "You didn't," I say simply. She studies me for a moment, permission to speak candidly. My lips part slightly. I nod. She exhales, almost relieved. "They don't know, do they?" I hold her gaze. "No, they never cared to." Silence stretches between us like a wire pulled taut. "You wrote the Svalbard Doctrine," she says quietly. It's not a question. My heart skips, but my face stays composed. "Not under that name," I answer. She nods almost reverently. I teach it. Strategic theory at the War College. The cardinal flutters away. I glance down at my hands. My fingers are steady now. Thank you, I say. No, ma'am, she replies. Thank you. Then she straightens and disappears into the crowd. I don't move for a long while. The music shifts into something softer, a string arrangement of an old pop song. I can hear the bride laughing somewhere near the dance floor. Glasses clinking. Toasts beginning. But none of that reaches me, because for the first time in a long time I feel seen. Not applauded, not celebrated. Just seen. When I was 9, my brother got caught lighting matches behind the church. He told the deacon I did it. I didn't argue. I just stood there, silent hands folded in front of my corduroy skirt, while Nathan pointed and my mother squeezed my shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. I remember thinking even then, it doesn't matter what's true. It matters who they want to believe. That's how it always was in our house. Nathan was loud charming in that restless, attention-hungry way that made grown-ups laugh even when he crossed the line. He got C's wrecked dad's car, forged his way into parties he wasn't invited to. Still, somehow, he was the pride of the family. And me, I was quiet. I read early solved puzzles in silence and learned not to correct anyone when they misquoted facts. I didn't raise my hand to be chosen. I just raised it when something needed doing, but being helpful is not the same as being loved. By the time I was 15, it was already understood in our house that I was too serious. At 17, too ambitious. At 20, too cold. And when I got into Harvard, that was when the distance became permanent. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Expensive place to get ideas no one asked for. Mom blinked twice, forced a smile. Will you even find a husband there? Only my grandmother said anything genuine. She took my hands in hers, leathery and warm, and whispered, "They don't have to understand you, darling. Just promise me you won't disappear to make them comfortable." She died that winter. Nathan took her room, said he needed the space for his crypto startup, another idea that flamed out after 18 months and a trail of unpaid debts. Still, he remained the favored child. Every Thanksgiving, every family gathering, it was Nathan they asked about. Nathan's new job, Nathan's girlfriend, Nathan's latest podcast idea. Me, I became still working on her paper, even after Harvard, even after I passed every oral defense, every peer review, even when my thesis was quietly forwarded to several defense advisory boards they didn't ask, didn't want to. To them, I was a girl who spent too long in libraries. Not the one who advised 2 regional counter-threat teams by the age of 30. Not the one whose work helped de-escalate a standoff in Eastern Europe. Just the one who came home alone and offered to do the dishes. I stopped trying after a while. I stopped explaining. I watched Nathan charm his way through new ventures and old mistakes, while Mom and Dad made excuses for every one of them. He's under pressure. He's figuring it out. He's a man. Men take risks. But when I missed one Christmas because I was flown out to Oslo for a classified policy roundtable, Mom told the aunts I had flaked. That word burned. Like everything I'd built, every sacrifice, every 3 a.m. Phone call and security clearance was just me being forgetful. In their minds, I had made myself smaller than my family name. Less accessible, less likable. Too serious, too quiet, too other. So I showed up to that wedding last week exactly as they wanted me. Nice dress, low profile, empty hands. Not the woman who'd sat across from generals. Not the woman who could order a lockdown with one coded sentence. Not the one who'd been assigned to quietly guide new liaisons from U.S. Army intelligence into specialized civilian sectors. No, just Nathan's sister. Even at the rehearsal dinner when someone mentioned Harvard and my name in the same breath, Nathan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his fork. "Yeah, she's smart," he said, nudging the best man. "Too smart for real life." That line stuck with me. Too smart for real life. As if my life with all its shadows and clearance levels and no sleep missions somehow wasn't real. It was always like that, this subtle, constant erasure. They didn't need to say, I didn't matter. They just treated my presence like a favor I should be grateful for. And I played along, because somewhere in me, the child who got blamed for those matches still wanted to be believed. still wanted to belong, still wanted just once to be enough without explanation. That's the part they never saw. Not the Harvard degrees, not the doctrine with my fingerprints all over it, not the classified briefings that carry my logic as their spine, but the cost of always being the one who absorbs the insult without reply. They saw restraint and mistook it for weakness. They saw silence and mistook it for shame. And they saw my eyes steady, unflinching, and called them cold. But they never saw what those eyes had witnessed. They never wanted to. They didn't know what it meant to spend 4 years writing a theory no one could publish, to argue in code words and classified drafts, to be praised only behind closed doors, because the real world, the one Nathan thought I wasn't part of, doesn't always cheer for women who don't make themselves small. So I let them laugh, let them forget, let them believe I was a disappointment who never fit the picture. Because the truth, I stopped trying to fit in a long time ago. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. Late spring, the Sunday before Memorial Day. I was visiting home, a rare thing because my mother had insisted. She wanted everyone under the same roof like the old days. I almost said no, but guilt is a powerful leash. The smell of grilled onions drifted through the back door. Nathan was outside holding court with some friends from high school still stuck in varsity stories like time never moved. I stayed in the kitchen arranging plates, folding napkins. I always did the quiet things. Then the landline rang. Not my mother's cell. The old beige phone mounted near the pantry. She still used it for calls. She didn't want to disappear. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was reaching for the salt when I heard her answer. Alina. No, she's just back for the weekend, she said lightly. I doubt she'll be in town long enough to bother with your event. There was a pause, then sharper. She's not interested in that kind of thing. She's not exactly personable. Silence. She intimidates people all right. She doesn't even try not to. It's just who she is. Another pause. Yes, I'll pass it on. But honestly, I wouldn't hold your breath. Click. I don't remember setting down the salt. I don't remember walking back into the hallway, but I remember my hands, how they started shaking. It hadn't occurred to me that someone would try to reach me through her, or that she would deliberately shut that door before I could even knock. The next day, I found out who it was. Director Sutton, Civilian Liaison Group, Army Strategic Research Division. I'd met her once briefly during a NATO simulation event in D.C. She had eyes like frostbite, sharp, analytical. She didn't waste words. Apparently, she'd been looking for someone to quietly chair a new strategic committee, something off-grid, off-paper, but deeply consequential. She asked if I was open to a conversation. My mother said no. She didn't tell me until after the invitation had already gone cold. She didn't leave her number. She shrugged. It's not like I memorized it. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I just walked upstairs, shut the guest room door, and sat on the bed. Blank walls, faded floral comforter. Still the same lamp I'd used at 16. And I thought, they don't just misunderstand me. They actively sabotage me. It wasn't the first time. Just the clearest. When I was 26, Nathan lost a large investment deal, a series of bad calls, and worse bookkeeping, and my father quietly sold part of Grandma's land to cover it. That land was supposed to be for me. My name was on the letter she left, but no one told me until months later. We thought you wouldn't want the stress, Dad said. When I was 29, I missed my cousin's engagement party because I was attending a closed-door summit in Brussels. I sent a quiet apology. Nathan told everyone I was too elite to be bothered. When I came back that winter, my mother said, "You know, Alina, no one likes a woman who acts like she's smarter than the room." I had learned to swallow those words like ice water, but the phone call with Director Sutton, that one broke something deeper, because it wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was erasure, intentional, calculated, a decision made on my behalf to keep me small, quiet, and visible, a message that I didn't just fail to belong, I didn't deserve to. And Nathan, he made it worse. Later that same week, he announced to the entire family during dinner that I'd probably peaked in college. Sis was a prodigy, he said, between bites of grilled salmon. Too bad real life doesn't grade you on term papers. I looked across the table. My father smirked. My mother changed the subject. No one said a word. And that's when I realized something I hadn't dared to name before. They resented me. Not for failing, but for quietly succeeding without needing them. For rising in rooms they'd never enter. For never asking their permission. For being someone they could not control. Their mockery wasn't casual. It was a tactic. Keep me small. Keep me questioning myself. Because if I ever stood fully in who I was, they would no longer be able to define me. And that terrified them. So they chipped away with jokes, dismissals, whispers, and silences. Until one day, I found myself in a guest room 20 years older, still folding towels just to feel useful, still trying to be palatable. That night, I sat on the back porch after everyone went to sleep. The stars were out, no moon, just dark, endless space. I whispered my resignation to no one, not from the army, not from my mission, but from them, from needing their applause, from mistaking proximity for belonging, from trying to earn love that would only ever come with conditions. I didn't cry. I just let go. There was a week I didn't leave my apartment. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean, I sat in the same chair by the window drinking cold coffee, letting the days pass without marking them. The sunlight would come and go. I'd hear the clatter of kids downstairs, the rumble of delivery trucks. But I didn't move. I'd left my suitcase by the door after returning from my parents' house. Still zipped. I couldn't bear to unpack. Like reopening it would somehow let all their words out again. Too cold, too smart for real life. Not exactly personable. I'd heard variations of those lines for years, but this time they didn't just bruise, they settled, like mold in the corners of my confidence. I began to wonder, had I built my whole life on a delusion? Did I mistake being useful for being wanted? Had I mistaken impact for worth? There's a peculiar silence that comes when even your achievements feel like strangers to you. I sat in it for hours, days, thinking of everything I'd given up to get where I was. No children, no partner, no soft traditions or open arms waiting at holidays. Just briefings, codes, strategy. Just a name that rarely got spoken aloud in rooms full of men who quoted my work but didn't know it was mine. I thought about deleting the original copy of my thesis, the one I kept tucked in a password-protected folder on a hard drive no one else had access to, just to see how it would feel. Like burning a flag you saluted too long. I didn't do it, but I hovered my finger over the delete key for longer than I care to admit. The tipping point came on a Wednesday. 3 days since I'd showered. I was wearing the same sweatshirt I'd graduated in, the one with the faded crimson seal, Harvard in block letters peeling at the edges. I hadn't worn it in years, but I didn't have the energy to change. I got an email, no subject line, just an attachment. A PDF, unmarked sender. It was a transcript. A closed-door debrief from a U.S. colonel who had deployed a counter-strategy lifted directly from my thesis. No credit, no citation, no mention of my name. Just a quiet confirmation that the doctrine had worked. It had saved lives. It had prevented a civilian collapse. It had strengthened a fragile ceasefire. I stared at the screen for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, I wept, not because I was proud, but because it felt like even the best version of me, the sharpest, most invisible, most precise mind I could offer, was only valuable as long as no one had to acknowledge it was mine. It was like being drafted into a war you weren't allowed to exist in. And still, I kept showing up. Still, I kept writing. Why that question haunted me. Why keep serving a world that never asked for you? Why keep working, refining, elevating if it never led to being seen? Why be excellent when the silence stayed louder than the praise? I sat with that question until it scraped everything raw, until I remembered something small. Freshman year, snow falling on the quad. I was walking alone after a late-night policy seminar, my boots crunching fresh powder. I passed by the chapel, saw the lights on, and stepped inside. Empty, except for one professor, an old man with trembling hands, writing something on the board. He looked up when I entered, smiled. "You're Alina Merritt, right?" I nodded, startled. He waved me over and pointed to an equation on the chalkboard. It was elegant, brutal in its simplicity, a framework for nonlinear deterrence, one I'd only ever drafted in a private research paper. He tapped the board. This changes things. I swallowed. But I haven't published You Don't Need a Podium, he said. You need precision. Then he walked away just like that. I'd forgotten that moment, forgotten how it had burned itself into me, not because it was praise, but because it was real, a private truth spoken plainly. And now, years later, in that silent apartment, I clung to it like rope in a flood. Because maybe that was the point. Maybe not all revolutions are loud. Maybe some power isn't meant to be performed, only proven. And maybe the deepest kind of belonging doesn't come from applause, but from standing so firmly in who you are that silence cannot move you. I didn't leap out of the chair. I didn't shower and smile and transform overnight. But I did close the laptop. I did unzip my suitcase and begin to sort the things inside. I did open my closet and press my uniform slow and steady like I was remembering how to breathe. I was not broken, just bruised, and bruises fade. That night, I opened a different folder, one that no one knew existed. Inside was the draft of a new policy model. Not for the Army, not for publication, for me. No code names, no redacted sources, just truth, sharp and clean and mine. I started writing again, one paragraph, then another, until the page felt warm with purpose. They had taken so much time credit, even my own sense of worth. But they hadn't taken this. They hadn't taken my clarity. They hadn't taken the words that only I knew how to shape. And when I turned out the light that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but I also felt returned to myself. The first time I wore the uniform again, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. Not at first. It had been nearly 6 months since my last on-base rotation. My civilian assignments had taken priority, classified intel syntheses, think tank briefings, strategy modeling behind layers of encrypted doors. Important work, but quiet, paper-bound, clean. I ran my hand over the pressed fabric, olive drab, silver insignia on my collar, my name stitched in black over my heart. Merit. It felt heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just forgotten how much it carried. I buttoned each clasp slowly, buckled my belt, slid the coin pouch into my inner pocket, the one I always kept tucked close, with the one item that grounded me, a quote from grandmother handwritten on old stationery. Lead without needing to be seen. That's how the real ones last. It was time to re-enter, not the field, but the rooms that decided what the field looked like. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask for permission. I simply replied to a long-forgotten email chain from a colonel in Stuttgart who had once told me, "If you ever want to brief directly, don't wait for an invite. Just say when." So I said when. 2 weeks later, I walked into a sterile briefing room at Ramstein. 7 men, 2 women, mid-level and senior officers. The kind who size you up in one glance and talk more than they listen, until you say something that stops the room. I presented an alternative deterrence model based on my unpublished doctrine, not the one they'd already picked apart in simulations, but the one I'd built in silence, the one I'd rewritten after the breakdown, the one that included everything I'd once been told not to put in writing: political deviation risks, soft asset vulnerabilities, and civilian impact timelines. I used no notes, only memory, discipline, and precision. At minute 36, someone interrupted. Major Eckhart, one of the louder ones. Where'd this model originate? I looked him square in the eye. My apartment, 2 months ago. After a denial I didn't ask for. There was a beat of silence, and then the general at the end of the table, General Lin, leaned back and said, "Run the numbers. If they hold, we use it." Just like that. No handshake, no congratulations. Just the quiet pivot of power. I didn't smile, didn't nod. I just packed up my materials, saluted, and walked out. That's how it always worked in my world. Power didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived in pivots. And that one was mine. From that day on, things moved fast. I was assigned 3 new scenario teams. 2 were forward-looking operations tied to Arctic cyber strategy. The third was domestic, less visible but just as critical. I chaired the meetings, directed the conversations. Half of them didn't even realize who I was. The other half knew exactly who I was and didn't say a word, but they listened. And for someone like me, that was everything. Back home, I said nothing. I didn't call my mother, didn't text Nathan. They didn't ask and I didn't offer. The less they knew, the better, because they weren't the audience anymore. They never had been. I kept my focus sharp. One of the teams I led included a young analyst named Rivera, whip-smart, slightly nervous, still unsure how much space she was allowed to take up. She reminded me of me at 24. I gave her every opportunity to lead a session. Every time she hesitated, I'd look at her not with push, but with presence. And one day she stood up, cleared her throat, and walked us through an entire Arctic decoy operation with complete command of the room. When it ended, she looked at me uncertain. I just nodded once. She smiled. A small one. But I recognized the kind. Not pride, not arrogance, relief. The relief of being allowed to rise. That was the power I had now, and the one no one could take. I didn't just execute strategy. I made space. I created silence for others to speak into. I built what I was never given. And still I told no one at home. Until the wedding. Until that day under the white tent with the sugared roses and the glittering flutes and the stifled laughter. Until Nathan made his little joke about my thesis. Until my mother didn't correct him. Until the woman in uniform looked at me from across the trellis and recognized what no one else at that table ever had. And I knew. My silence had never been weakness. It was the strategy. The longer they underestimated me, the cleaner the reveal. Because someday someone would see what I'd built, not the degrees, not the briefings, but the quiet architecture of how I'd led, and that day would change everything. I didn't need to plan for it. I just needed to stay steady. Let the noise keep talking, and keep walking through the rooms that matter. I wasn't expecting anyone official that morning. I had come early to the University Center to prepare for the International Defense Policy Roundtable, mostly to breathe, actually. My palms were clammy, even though I'd rewritten my briefing packet 3 times the night before. It was held in the wood-paneled Eisenhower room, the kind of place that made your heels echo and your confidence shrink. As the first guest speaker, I had 20 minutes to present my research, a comparative study on autonomous battlefield decision trees cross-validated with ethical override patterns from NATO, South Korea, and U.S. Pacific Command, the kind of paper my brother once called obsessive navel-gazing for nerds with 0 field hours. That comment used to sting. Now it was just air. Still, I hadn't told my family I'd been selected. Not even my mom. I didn't need another round of polite indifference. A few professors filtered in early. I nodded politely. One complimented the executive summary packet I'd pre-stapled. Another joked that I was too young to be listed as a co-author on anything related to cross-military ethics. I smiled without reacting. Then the door opened again, this time with purpose. I glanced up and a woman stepped in, flanked by 2 aides. Tall, calm, mid-40s maybe. Olive drab combat blouse with no name badge, but the American flag patch was stitched firm on her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the room with the calm alertness I'd seen in field officers. And then it hit me, the shoulder insignia. She was a full colonel. More precisely, Colonel Ainsley Markham, 3rd Tactical Strategy Group, U.S. Army. I felt my spine stiffen. I hadn't invited her. She wasn't on the list of attendees. One of the aides checked a clipboard and walked over. Dr. Rhodes, I stood. Yes, she's here for the first session. Came in early from Andrews. Of course, I said quickly, my mind racing. Colonel Markham took a seat at the edge of the first row. She nodded once, not smiling, not frowning, just watching. She'd brought no paper, no laptop. Just a quiet kind of gravity. There's a strange power in being observed by someone who doesn't need to say anything. I cleared my throat and continued organizing the visual brief. My voice was steady, but my hands had a tremor I couldn't quite mask. Then I heard it. Behind me. 2 familiar voices. Oh, this is definitely her kind of place. Wooden walls, arrogance, and paper cuts. That was Jared, my brother. He and my father had slipped in through the side door like they were entering a courtroom to challenge a fine. Dad wore a blazer, no tie. Jared had on a windbreaker and that same old smirk, the one he wore when he visited me at Harvard, and said the walls smelled like old people and fear. They hadn't RSVP'd. I hadn't invited them, but someone must have told them where I'd be. Maybe Mom. Maybe one of Jared's colleagues in D.C. He had friends who flitted between think tanks and legacy defense firms. I guess they figured it would be funny to show up. Jared scanned the room with a look of mild contempt. "Let me guess," he whispered to Dad. "She's going to talk about robots and feelings, while the real world's falling apart." He said it loud enough for the row behind him to hear. I froze. Not because I was ashamed, but because I saw something shift. Colonel Markham turned slowly. She hadn't looked at him before, but now she did. Her eyes didn't widen, her jaw didn't move. She simply studied him the way a seasoned soldier studies the horizon before a storm. Then she looked at me, and just slightly tilted her head. It was a gesture I couldn't explain, but somehow I knew what it meant. Proceed. You don't answer small voices when you hold quiet power. So I did. I stood at the podium and began. The screen lit up. The university logo, then the title Predictive Ethics in Autonomous Defense Protocols. When AI hesitates, who decides? I didn't look at my father. I didn't seek Jared's face. I spoke to the room and to her, the colonel. Within 2 minutes, you could hear the silence thicken. No rustling, no muttering. I laid out the thesis, showed real-world test results from joint wargame simulations, highlighted an AI freeze moment during a U.S. ROC defense trial where human override saved a civilian grid from shutdown due to faulty classification. Then came the conclusion. A system can mimic human reasoning, but it cannot inherit human responsibility. And without responsibility, authority is misplaced. This research proposes a trilateral accountability protocol rooted in sovereignty-first ethics adaptable in real time. I finished. The room was quiet for a beat. Then came 3 sharp claps. Colonel Markham, slowly, deliberately, just 3. Others followed, but hers landed like anchors in the air. I nodded respectfully. Thank you. As I packed up, I noticed Jared trying to avoid eye contact. My father stared at the floor, fidgeting with a paper cup. Colonel Markham stood, walked over, and with a voice that didn't ask permission, she said, "Dr. Rhodes." I stood straighter. "You said something today that the Pentagon has spent years dancing around. I appreciate clarity when it comes from someone who earned it." I opened my mouth to respond, but I didn't get the chance. Because right then, right behind her, one of the staff aides approached and whispered something in her ear. Colonel Markham turned, nodded once, then looked back at me. Her tone softened. "I won't forget this brief. Neither will command." Then she added more quietly, "You held the room, including the ones who didn't want to be in it." And with that, she walked out. My brother was frozen. My father looked like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. And I finally exhaled. For once, I didn't need to defend my voice. The room had done it for me. And the most powerful person in that room, she never had to raise hers. The last glimmer of twilight caught on the razor-sharp creases of Commander Rivas's uniform as she stepped away from the podium. Her voice still echoed faintly in the auditorium, her final line hanging in the air like a chord. This thesis wasn't about strategy. It was about dignity. And she never forgot that even when others did. The applause had started slow, almost hesitant. Then it surged louder, deeper. Not just respectful. Reverent. I stood still, offstage, heart-pounding hands slightly trembling at my sides. I wasn't used to applause. Not like this. Not from this crowd. My parents were sitting in the 4th row. I saw Mom, first hands clasped tightly in her lap, face unreadable. Then Dad, arms crossed, jaw flexing, not clapping. Not at first. But then came that subtle moment he leaned into Mom and whispered something. She looked at him, blinked, and slowly nodded. And then he clapped. Once. Then again. Until he was standing too. A standing ovation from the man who once said my work had no real-world value. I didn't cry, not in that moment. But something inside me loosened, a taut, bruised thread finally easing. The reception was held in a side courtyard lit by amber lamps. A string quartet played softly under the vines, and long tables of finger food lined the perimeter. I didn't go near them. I stood near the edge, holding a glass of sparkling water I'd barely touched. I wasn't ready to mingle, not with them. Then I heard boots, the deliberate, quiet kind, soft tread, too controlled for civilians. I turned. Commander Rivas was walking toward me alone, unhurried, her gaze steady, assessing. Not unkind, but sharp, like a scalpel. She stopped just in front of me and extended her hand. You wrote it like someone who's lived it. I blinked. I did. She nodded once, I figured. A pause. And then a slight tilt of her head. You ever think about coming back, not just to research real field work? With the right clearance, the right directive, you'd be an asset again. A bigger one. The implication landed hard. Again. She knew. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure how. But then I said quietly, I don't think they'd let me. Her expression didn't change, but her words dropped with weight. You're already in. She didn't clarify. Didn't have to. The thesis, now officially endorsed and reviewed, was being fast-tracked to circulate in NATO's Strategic Simulation Network, which meant Tier 1 visibility, which meant some people in dark suits were likely watching already. You spoke a language they couldn't, she said. Made it human. That's harder than all the code names and redacted reports. That's why I came tonight. I finally found my voice. Thank you, Commander. She raised a brow. Doctor, call me Natalia when you're ready. Then, with a last glance, she nodded once and walked away. The guests began to leave slowly. Most filtered out to valet. Others lingered in the corners. I felt someone come up beside me. It was my brother. Hey, he said. I waited. He scratched the back of his neck. Didn't realize it'd be that heavy. That's how war usually is, I said softly. He nodded, then added, I was wrong. About the thesis. About you. It didn't feel like vindication, more like a recalibration, a quiet shift. But it was real. Thanks, I said, meaning it. Then he said something that caught me off guard. I read it last night. All of it. I turned to face him. He looked down. You weren't just writing theory. You were processing something. He glanced up. Was it about her, your interpreter? My throat tightened. Yes, I said. Partly. He was silent for a long moment. Then she sounded brave. She was. He nodded. I'm sorry you lost her. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hide the grief. I let it sit between us, no named, not judged. I think she'd be proud, he said. I stepped outside the building into the cooling night air. Fog from the river curled around the edges of the street lamps. The city was quieter here near the campus edge. I heard my name again. This time from behind me. Dr. Alina Hart. I turned. A woman stood at the curb beside a black sedan, civilian clothes. But the air around her was unmistakably official, that crisp, invisible authority. Yes, I answered. She didn't offer a card, just a single envelope. From Director Monroe, she said. He read your conclusion. He'd like to speak. I didn't ask who Monroe was. The last name said enough. Central Command, Strategic Ops, possibly Langley. I took the envelope. The woman offered a slight nod, then got in the car and disappeared into the mist. Back in my apartment later that night, I sat at my desk, the envelope still sealed. My fingers hovered over it for a long time. I thought of the years I'd spent trying to prove something not just to my family, but to myself. That I hadn't imagined the things I'd lived through, that they mattered. I thought of my interpreter's face in the desert, her quiet steadiness, her fearless intelligence. I thought of the battalion commander tonight, her words like a challenge and a homecoming all at once. And I thought of the way the crowd looked at me, not with pity or condescension, but respect. Full open earned. They didn't see a little sister, or a failure, or a nerd with a pen, as my cousin once joked. They saw someone who had walked through it and come out stronger, not louder, not meaner, just unshakable. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single-sentence asset status reviewed. Eyes only. Call when ready. Below it a private number. I didn't smile, but I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt tall.